Lightning cracked across the sky, and Mara Ellison nearly dropped her flashlight into the mud. The rain had turned the trail into a river, and she had no idea where the river was taking her. 1 hour ago, she had been on a marked hiking path with clear signs and a parking lot in sight. Now there were no signs. There was no parking lot. There was only endless black trees leaning over her like they were watching. "This is what I get for trusting a phone app," she muttered, wiping water from her eyes. Her boots slid on a slope of wet leaves, and she grabbed a branch just in time to stop herself from tumbling down the hill. Somewhere close, a howl rolled through the storm, low and long, and every hair on her arms stood up. She told herself it was a dog. A big dog. Nothing else made sense. Another howl answered the first, from a different direction, and Mara's chest tightened. She picked up her pace, moving from tree to tree, until the ground suddenly leveled out, and the trees thinned into a clearing. She stopped, breathing hard, and stared. In the middle of the clearing stood a man. He was not dressed for a storm. He wore no jacket, only a dark shirt clinging to broad shoulders, and he stood perfectly still despite the wind whipping around him, as if the weather had agreed to leave him alone. His hair was black and damp, pushed back from a face that looked carved rather than born, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Even in the darkness, even through sheets of rain, she could see they were an impossible shade of gold, glowing faintly like two small fires. Mara took a step back. The man's entire body went rigid. He looked at her the way someone looks at a miracle they never expected to happen. His lips parted, and for a moment he seemed to forget how to speak. "You," he said, so quietly it was almost lost in the rain. "Me? No, wrong person. I'm just lost," Mara said quickly, holding up both hands like she was trying to calm a large animal, which, given his eyes, did not feel like an unreasonable comparison. "I need to find the main road. Do you know which way that is?" He did not answer the question. Instead he walked toward her, slow and deliberate, the way someone approaches something precious and fragile. Mara took another step back, boots squelching in the mud. "Stop right there," she said. "I mean it." He stopped. His jaw tightened like the act of obeying her cost him great effort. "My name is Cade," he said. "I am not going to hurt you, I promise you that." "Great. Wonderful. Very reassuring from a man standing in a storm with glowing eyes," Mara said. "Look, I don't know what's happening here. Some kind of contact lens thing. Cosplay event. I really don't care. I just need directions." "You don't understand what you are," Cade said, stepping closer despite himself. "What you are to me. I'm a veterinary assistant from 3 towns over, who got lost on a hiking trail," Mara said flatly. "That's what I am." Something in her tone, so blunt and unimpressed, seemed to startle him more than anything else that night. He tilted his head slightly, studying her, as if she were a puzzle refusing to fit together the way it should. "You feel it too," he said. "I know you do. The pull. The only pull I feel is gravity, and it's telling me to get away from the strange forest man," Mara said, and turned to walk back the way she came. She got 3 steps before 2 more figures emerged from the trees, flanking her path. A tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a young man with nervous eyes blocked her retreat, both watching her with the same unsettling intensity as Cade. "Alpha," the woman said carefully, not taking her eyes off Mara. "Is this her?" "Yes," Cade said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word, as if saying it out loud made it undeniably true. "Okay, this is officially a lot," Mara said, spinning in place to keep all 3 of them in view. "Is this a prank? Are there cameras somewhere? Because if this is one of those hidden camera shows, I want it on record that I am not signing a release form." The young man let out a short laugh before catching himself and going silent again. "There are no cameras," Cade said. "There is only truth, and I understand you are not ready to hear it." "Try me," Mara said, crossing her arms even though she was shivering. "Go ahead. Tell me the truth. I love a good story." Cade studied her for a long moment, weighing his words, then said plainly, "I am the Alpha of the Thornwood Pack. My people are not entirely human. Neither, tonight, is the truth of who you are to me. You are my mate. Fate chose you for me long before either of us was born." Mara stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the rain. "Okay, sure. That's a normal thing to say to someone you just met in the woods." "I understand this is difficult to accept," Cade said. No, it's not difficult. It's absurd, Mara said. You're telling me you're some kind of, what, wolf man? And I'm your destined soulmate because a forest told you so? I'm going to need you to point me to the road now, please, before I start walking in a direction and hoping for the best. The road will not take you where you think it will, the woman beside Cade said. Not tonight. The paths shift for outsiders during a storm like this. The paths shift, Mara repeated, deadpan. Of course they do. Naturally, paths do that. She turned and walked directly into the trees, ignoring all three of them, determined to prove a point, even to herself. She counted her steps, kept the wind at her back the way she had a moment before, and pushed through wet branches for what felt like 10 full minutes. Then the trees opened again, and she found herself standing in the exact same clearing, facing the exact same three people. Mara stopped walking. She looked at the ground, then at the trees, then back at Cade, whose expression had shifted from patient to something gentler, almost sympathetic. That's not possible, she said quietly. I walked in a straight line. The land protects its own, Cade said. It slows outsiders until the pack is ready to let them go, or in rare cases, until the outsider chooses to stay. I'm not choosing anything, Mara said, her voice rising with the first real edge of panic she had allowed herself all night. I have a job on Monday. I have a cat that needs feeding. I have an entire life waiting for me, and none of it involves glowing eyes, or forests that loop around like a hamster wheel. You will be looked after, Cade said. You have my word. No harm will come to you here. Your word, Mara repeated, from a man I've known for 10 minutes, who just told me I'm his destined mate. Forgive me if that doesn't fill me with confidence. The young man beside Cade, clearly unable to help himself, murmured to the woman, she really isn't impressed by any of this. No kidding, the woman muttered back. Cade shot them both a look, and they straightened immediately, falling silent with the kind of instant discipline that told Mara these people, whatever else they were, respected him deeply. If anything, it made the whole situation feel more real, and more strange, and far less like a joke she could laugh off before bed. Here is what is going to happen, Cade said, stepping closer again, close enough now that Mara could see the rain running down the sharp line of his jaw. You will come with us tonight, out of this storm, and in the morning, we will find a way to help you understand, and to get you home safely. I will not force anything on you. I only ask that you trust me long enough to get out of the rain. Mara looked past him at the trees, imagining trying to walk out again, and ending up back in this same clearing for a third time. She looked at the storm, which showed no sign of letting up. She looked at her own soaked clothes and numb fingers. Fine, she said finally, through gritted teeth, but I want it on the record that I do not believe one word of any of this. Not the mate thing, not the wolf thing, not the magic forest thing. I am going with you, because it is raining, and I would like to not catch a cold, not because I believe in destiny. Noted, Cade said, and something like relief passed briefly across his face. They walked together through the trees, the two others trailing a respectful distance behind, until the forest gave way to a wide stretch of land Mara had not expected at all. Wooden buildings, sturdy and well-kept, stood in careful rows beneath tall pines, warm light glowing from windows despite the storm. It looked like a village pulled from another century, and quietly hidden from the modern world. Mara stopped walking again, staring at it. This is not on any map, she said. No, Cade agreed. It is not meant to be. So it's a compound, Mara said, a new theory forming rapidly in her mind. Some kind of secretive community that lives off-grid and wears contact lenses to convince outsiders you're supernatural. That actually makes more sense than magic wolves. Cade almost smiled at that, an expression that softened his entire face for a brief moment, before vanishing again. Believe whatever helps you sleep tonight, he said. Tomorrow, we can talk more. He led her toward the largest building at the center of the village, a solid structure of dark wood, with smoke rising from a chimney despite the rain. Warmth spilled out the moment the door opened, and Mara stepped inside gratefully, her priorities suddenly narrowing down to nothing more complicated than getting dry and getting warm. Behind her, she heard the woman speak quietly to Cade, in a tone clearly not meant for her ears. The whole pack is going to know by morning. The king has found his mate. I know, Cade said softly. And she thinks we're a cult, the young man added. I know that too, Cade said, and for the first time that night, there was something almost like exhausted amusement in his voice. Mara, standing near the fire and wringing water from her sleeves, caught only fragments of the conversation, but enough to understand one clear thing. Whatever this place was, whatever these people believed, they were absolutely convinced that her arrival meant something enormous. She was equally convinced that in the morning, with daylight and dry clothes and a clear head, all of this would sort itself into something ordinary and explainable. She had no idea how wrong she was. Morning light did not fix anything, no matter how much Mara had hoped it would. She woke on a soft bed in a small wooden room, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. For one groggy second, she thought she was home. Then she saw the rough wooden beams overhead, the hand-carved chair by the window, and the entire memory of the previous night crashed back into her at once. "Nope," she said out loud to the empty room. "Nope, nope, nope." She got up, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and walked to the window. Outside, the storm had cleared, and sunlight poured over a village that looked even stranger in daylight than it had in the dark. People moved between the wooden buildings, carrying baskets, tools, and firewood, all of them glancing toward her window as they passed, some with open curiosity, others with expressions Mara could only describe as reverent, which made no sense at all for a stranger they had never met. A knock came at the door. Mara turned to find dry clothes had been left on the chair without her noticing, folded neatly. She dressed quickly, deciding that clean and dry was worth the strangeness of borrowed clothing, and opened the door to find Cade standing there, looking like he had not slept at all. "Good morning," he said carefully, as though testing whether the words themselves might set her off. "Is it?" Mara said. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm still in a fairy tale I did not agree to join." "I brought food," Cade said, holding up a woven basket like a peace offering. "And I meant what I said last night. I will help you get home. I only ask for a little time first." Mara crossed her arms, studying him in daylight for the first time. Without the rain and the shadows, he looked less like something out of a nightmare, and more like an actual person. Tall, undeniably handsome, but tired around the eyes, in a way that made him look almost human. Almost. "Fine," she said. "Time for what exactly?" "To show you," Cade said simply. "Because I understand words alone will not convince you of anything." "Good instinct," Mara said. "Words haven't convinced me of anything since I was about 6 years old." He led her out into the village, and word seemed to spread the moment she stepped outside, heads turning, conversations pausing. Mara felt like a zoo exhibit, and she said so loudly enough that a few people nearby actually laughed before catching themselves. "They're not laughing at you," Cade said. "They're laughing because you're right." "Comforting," Mara said dryly. They stopped near a wide training yard, where 2 young men sparred with wooden practice swords, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost too smooth to be entirely natural. Mara watched, arms crossed, unimpressed on the surface even as something in her chest tightened at the sight. "Fast reflexes," she said. "Good training. Doesn't prove anything except that you all take fitness very seriously." Cade nodded to one of the sparring partners, a broad-shouldered young man named Callum, who obediently stepped back, breathing hard, and rolled his shoulders. Then, in front of Mara's eyes, his fingernails darkened and lengthened slightly. His jaw shifted just enough to look wrong, and low sound rumbled in his throat that no human throat could naturally produce. Mara's mouth went dry. She stared, waiting for the trick to reveal itself, for a hidden seam or a strange prosthetic edge. There was none. "Special effects makeup," she said finally, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Really impressive special effects makeup. You people must have quite the budget." Callum, still holding the partial shift, looked at Cade with an expression somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "She's really saying that." "She really is," Cade said. "Do it again," Mara said, stepping closer despite herself, curiosity briefly winning out over fear. "Slowly this time." Callum obliged, shifting the change back to normal with visible effort, joints popping quietly back into place, his nails shortening, his jaw settling. Mara watched every second of it, searching for wires, for prosthetics, for anything that would let her file this safely under fake. She found nothing. "Okay," she said slowly. "That was, admittedly, a very good trick." It is not a trick, Cade said gently. It has to be, Mara said, though her voice wavered slightly. Things like that don't happen. There are rules. Biology has rules. Our biology has different rules, Cade said. That does not make it less real. It only makes it different from what you are used to. Mara pressed her palms against her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her thoughts. When she looked up again, her jaw was set with fresh determination. Fine. Let's say hypothetically that what I just saw was real. That still doesn't mean any of the other stuff you said is true. The mate thing, the destiny thing, that could just be a story your community tells to explain who ends up living here. You felt something the moment you saw me, Cade said quietly. Admit that much at least. I felt startled, Mara said. Startled is not the same as fate. For us, it often begins exactly like that, Cade said. A pull neither side can explain right away. It grows stronger with time, not weaker. Then I guess we'll find out it doesn't grow at all, Mara said, crossing her arms again. Because I plan to be gone before it has the chance. They walked on through the village, Cade patiently pointing out small proofs along the way. A woman whose eyes flashed gold briefly, when startled by a falling tool. An older man who could hear a conversation happening 2 buildings away, and repeated it back word for word. A child, who healed a small scrape on his knee within minutes, without a single bandage. Each time, Mara reached for an explanation. Contact lenses, excellent hearing, fast healing genetics. By midday, her explanations were growing thinner and thinner, though she refused to admit it out loud. You are running out of ordinary reasons, Cade observed as they sat on a bench near the edge of the village, sharing a simple meal of bread and dried meat that tasted better than Mara expected. I have plenty of reasons left, Mara said, though it came out less certain than she intended. I just haven't said them all yet. You are the most stubborn person I have ever met, Cade said, and there was no frustration in his voice, only something closer to fascination. Thank you, Mara said. I consider that a compliment. It was meant as one, Cade said. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and Mara became uncomfortably aware of how close he was sitting, how steady his gaze felt when it settled on her, how her pulse had picked up in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She stood up quickly, brushing crumbs from her lap. I still want to go home, she said, more to remind herself than him. I know, Cade said, standing as well, and I will find a way to make that happen, once it is safe. Once the magic forest decides to let me leave. You mean, Mara said. Something like that, Cade admitted. As they walked back toward the center of the village, a tall man with narrow eyes and a carefully neutral expression watched them pass from the shadow of a doorway. His gaze lingered on Mara a moment too long, before shifting to Cade with something colder, underneath the polite nod he gave his king. Mara noticed the look but said nothing, filing it away along with everything else she refused to fully process. She had enough theories to sort through already, and something told her that Stranger's expression was not going to be the last thing that complicated her stay in this village. She just did not yet know how much that particular complication would come to matter. By the 3rd day, Mara had stopped counting the ways she tried to leave, mostly because none of them had worked, and she refused to give the forest the satisfaction of being tracked. She sat on the porch of the small guest house they had given her, watching pack members go about their morning routines, and found herself, against every instinct she had, starting to recognize faces. The woman from that first night was named Sable, and she ran the training yard with the discipline of someone who had done it for decades. The nervous young man was called Pike, and he had a habit of talking too fast whenever Mara looked directly at him. She was cataloging all of this the way she might catalog anything unfamiliar, carefully, at a distance, refusing to let herself get comfortable. You're staring at Sable again, Cade said, sitting down beside her without asking, which she had noticed he did often, as though her permission was something he hoped for, but never fully expected. I'm observing, Mara corrected. There's a difference. Of course, Cade said, the corner of his mouth twitching. She runs that yard like a military unit, Mara said. I respect that, honestly, even if I still think this entire place operates like an elaborate off-grid community that happens to have excellent choreography. Cade let out a short laugh, surprised out of him. Choreography. What else would you call perfectly synchronized fighting like that? Mara asked, gesturing toward the yard, where several pack members moved through drills with eerie precision. I would call it training that has been refined over centuries, Cade said. Some of the people out there have been perfecting those movements since before either of our countries had the borders they do now. Mara turned to look at him properly. Centuries, she repeated. As in, actual centuries. Not a figure of speech. Our kind live far longer than humans, Cade said simply. Sable is older than she looks, so am I. How old exactly? Mara asked, half daring him to answer, half hoping he would say something that let her dismiss the whole conversation as an exaggerated joke. Older than I am comfortable saying out loud to someone who still thinks I might be running a very committed theater production, Cade said. Fair, Mara admitted, allowing herself a small smile before she caught it, and smoothed her expression back into neutral. They sat in silence for a while, the sun climbing higher, warming the porch boards beneath them. Mara noticed, not for the first time, that being near him did something strange to the pace of her breathing. A steadiness she could not entirely explain, and she hated that she noticed it at all. I need to call my job, she said abruptly, standing up to break whatever quiet moment had been building between them. I'm supposed to be at the clinic tomorrow. If I don't show up, they'll assume something happened to me. Something did happen to you, Cade said, standing as well. Something explainable, Mara said. Not something I can put on a form. Cade considered this for a moment. There is no signal here that reaches your world's networks. The territory does not allow it, but I can send someone to leave a message near the edge of the border, where the barrier is thin enough for such things to pass through. You have a person for that specific job? Mara asked, eyebrows raised. We have had outsiders before, Cade said carefully. Rarely. But it has happened. Mara filed that piece of information away too, wondering exactly how many other confused humans had stood on this porch, asking the same questions she was asking now, and what had happened to them in the end. She decided not to ask, not yet, unsure she wanted the answer. Fine, she said instead. Send your person. Tell my boss I had a family emergency. Something believable, please. Not anything about magic forests. Understood, Cade said, and something in his tone suggested he found the whole request more amusing than he let on. Later that afternoon, Mara wandered the edges of the village on her own for the first time, testing how far the invisible boundaries of her freedom actually extended. She discovered quickly that no one stopped her, though several pairs of eyes followed her from a respectful distance, clearly under instructions to keep her in sight without crowding her. She found herself near a wide field where children played some kind of running game, laughing and shifting between fully human forms and smaller wolf shapes with an ease that made Mara's chest ache in a way she did not want to examine too closely. One small girl with copper hair noticed her watching and ran over immediately, entirely unafraid. Are you the king's mate? The girl asked bluntly, tilting her head. I am a lost hiker, Mara said. That's it. That's the whole story. That's not what everyone is saying, the girl said matter-of-factly. Well, everyone is wrong, Mara said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. The girl studied her with the unfiltered honesty only children seem to have. You don't smell like you think you're wrong, she said, then ran off before Mara could ask what exactly that meant. Mara stood there a long moment, unsettled by the comment more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was a strange thing for a child to say, nothing more, and continued walking, though the girl's words stuck with her for the rest of the day, like a splinter she could not quite dig out. That evening, Cade found her sitting by the fire in the main hall, staring into the flames with an expression far more thoughtful than her usual sharp humor. You're quiet, he observed, sitting across from her. I'm thinking, Mara said. About what? About how a little kid told me, I don't smell like someone who's wrong, Mara said. Which is an insane sentence to be bothered by. And yet here I am, bothered. Cade's expression softened in a way Mara was starting to recognize, and dread a little, because it made her own chest do something complicated in response. Our senses tell us truths before our minds are ready to accept them, he said. Even children can read it. It doesn't make the disbelief wrong to feel. It only means part of you already knows something your mind refuses to say out loud. Mara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, unsure for the first time since arriving. I'm not ready to say anything out loud, she said finally, quietly, Not yet. I'm not asking you to, Cade said. I only ask that you stay long enough to find out what's true, before you decide what to reject. Mara looked at him across the firelight, at the patience in his gaze, at the restraint of a man who clearly wanted more than he was letting himself ask for, and felt something inside her stubborn resistance crack, just slightly, just enough to notice. She did not tell him that. She was not ready to tell herself that either. But outside, unnoticed by either of them, the same narrow-eyed man from days before watched the two of them through the window, his expression unreadable, already turning over plans of his own. The narrow-eyed man had a name, and Mara learned it the following morning, when Cade introduced them formally in the main hall, though the word formally barely applied to the tense silence that followed. This is Corvin, Cade said, his voice carefully even. My cousin. He handles much of the pack's border security. Charmed, Corvin said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. His eyes moved over Mara with open assessment, the way someone studies a problem rather than a person. So this is the human the entire village cannot stop talking about. I have a name, Mara said flatly. Of course you do, Corvin said, a thin smile crossing his face that did not reach his eyes. Mara, wasn't it? Tell me, Mara, has the Alpha explained to you what happens to a pack when its leader's attention is divided? Corvin, Cade said, a warning edge slipping into his voice. I'm only making conversation, Corvin said smoothly. She should understand the position she's placing him in. Every hour spent chasing a human who refuses to accept any of this is an hour not spent guarding our borders, borders that other packs would very much like to test. I didn't ask him to chase anything, Mara said, crossing her arms. In case that wasn't clear, I've been trying to leave since the moment I got here. And yet you remain, Corvin said. How convenient. That's enough, Cade said, his voice dropping into something with real authority behind it, and Corvin, despite his obvious dislike of the situation, inclined his head in the barest gesture of respect before turning and walking away. Mara watched him go, arms still crossed. Friendly guy, she said, real warm personality. He is protective of the pack, Cade said, though there was tension in his shoulders that suggested even he found Corvin's protectiveness exhausting at times. He has reason to be cautious of change. It does not excuse his rudeness toward you. I've dealt with worse, Mara said, though privately, she filed Corvin away as someone worth watching carefully, an instinct sharpened by years of reading difficult clients at the veterinary clinic who smiled while their hands stayed clenched. Over the following days, the tension around her did not disappear, though most of the pack remained kind, even eager, treating her with a warmth that made her deeply uncomfortable, given how firmly she still insisted none of this was real. Sable began teaching her small things almost without meaning to, how to identify which plants were safe to eat in the surrounding woods, how to read the subtle shift in a wolf's posture that meant danger. Pike, still nervous around her but slowly warming up, taught her a card game the pack children played, one that involved absolutely no supernatural elements at all, and which Mara suspected he offered specifically to give her something normal to hold on to. You're all being remarkably nice to someone who keeps calling this place a cult, Mara said one evening, sitting with Pike over their third round of cards. The Alpha's mate isn't exactly a small thing, Pike said, shrugging. People want you to feel welcome. Some people, he added, glancing toward the door where Corvin had passed by earlier that day, have other feelings about it. I noticed, Mara said dryly. He looks at me like I stole something from him personally. Not exactly, Pike said, then hesitated, clearly debating how much to say. Corvin's always believed he should have more say in how the pack is run. A distracted alpha, especially one distracted by an outsider, gives him an opening to argue he should have more control. That's all. It's not really about you. You're just useful to his argument. Mara absorbed that quietly, filing it next to everything else she had collected about this strange hidden world she had not asked to be pulled into. She thought about Cade's tired eyes each morning, the way he handled disputes among his people with visible patience, despite obvious exhaustion, the way he had never once, not a single time, forced her to do anything she did not choose herself. She still called it a cult out loud sometimes, mostly out of habit now more than genuine belief, and mostly because saying anything else terrified her more than she wanted to admit. One afternoon, Cade found her sitting near the edge of the training yard, watching Sable correct a young fighter's stance with brisk, efficient movements. "You've been quiet about wanting to leave lately," he observed, sitting beside her the way he always did now, without asking, though she had stopped minding. "I haven't stopped wanting to leave," Mara said. "I've just accepted that walking into the forest and hoping for the best clearly isn't going to work." "That's not quite the same as accepting anything else," Cade said. "No," Mara agreed, "it's not." They sat together in silence for a while, watching the drills continue, and Mara found herself unexpectedly comfortable, in a way that alarmed her more than any glowing eyes or partial transformation had managed to do so far. Comfort felt more dangerous than fear. Fear she knew how to handle. Comfort meant she was starting to let her guard down, and every instinct she had built over years of independence screamed against that. "I still don't believe in fate," she said finally, mostly to remind herself. "You don't have to," Cade said. "Fate doesn't require belief to be true. It only requires patience to be understood." "That sounds like something written on a motivational poster," Mara said. Cade actually laughed at that, a real laugh, warm and surprised out of him, and Mara felt an unwelcome flutter in her chest at the sound of it, one she immediately tried to bury under sarcasm. "Don't laugh at my jokes," she said. "It's confusing when the Wolf King has a sense of humor." "I'll try to remember to stay properly intimidating," Cade said, still smiling. Across the yard, Corvin watched the exchange from a distance, his expression sharpening into something colder before he turned and walked away, already composing, in the quiet corners of his mind, exactly how he intended to use this growing closeness against the both of them when the moment came. Mara had no idea that anyone was watching. She was too busy trying, and failing, not to smile back at Cade, wondering, despite every ounce of stubborn resistance she still clung to, what exactly was happening to her resolve to leave this place behind. 2 weeks into her stay, Mara noticed something happening to her body that she absolutely refused to name out loud. It started small, a headache that appeared whenever Cade left for meetings that kept him away for more than a few hours. A restlessness in her chest that eased the moment he walked back into a room, as though her own lungs had been holding their breath until he returned. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was the strange food, the unfamiliar water, the general chaos of being kidnapped by fate, or by a cult, depending on which day you asked her. "You look pale," Sable said one morning, studying Mara with the same critical eye she used on injured trainees. "Has this happened before?" "I'm fine," Mara said, pressing a hand against her temple. "Just a headache. I get them sometimes." "How often has the Alpha been away this week?" Sable asked, not phrasing it as a question, so much as an accusation, aimed at a truth Mara did not want to examine. "I have no idea what that has to do with anything," Mara said, though even as she said it, she realized Cade had been gone since the previous evening, handling some dispute at the northern border, and her headache had started shortly after his absence, stretched past a full day. "It has everything to do with it," Sable said. "The bond does not care whether you accept it. It will make itself known regardless." "That's ridiculous," Mara said. "Headaches are just headaches." "Call it Stockholm Syndrome, if that helps you sleep at night," Sable said, unbothered, echoing almost exactly the phrase Mara had used privately in her own head more than once. "But your body already knows something your mind refuses to say." Mara wanted to argue further, but the headache pulsed sharply behind her eyes at that exact moment, as if agreeing with Sable out of spite, and she pressed her lips together instead, saying nothing. Cade returned that evening, tired and travel-worn, and the moment he stepped into the main hall, Mara felt the pressure behind her eyes ease so suddenly, it was almost embarrassing. She caught herself standing up before she consciously decided to, drawn toward him like the pull was something physical rather than emotional, and she stopped herself halfway across the room, arms crossing defensively as though that might undo the moment. "You're staring," Cade said, a tired smile tugging at his mouth. "I am not staring," Mara said. "I am simply noting that you have returned, which is relevant information." "Of course," Cade said, clearly amused despite his exhaustion. "Did the border dispute get resolved?" Mara asked, deflecting quickly. "For now," Cade said, sitting heavily near the fire. "Rogue wolves, testing the eastern line again. Nothing my people couldn't handle, but it required my presence to settle without further conflict." "Rogue wolves," Mara repeated. As in, actual wolves who are actual problems, not metaphorical problems. Very real problems, Cade said. Packs without territory sometimes grow desperate, and desperate packs make dangerous decisions. Mara sat across from him, studying the exhaustion carved into his face, and felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with headaches and everything to do with worry, an emotion she had absolutely no interest in examining, given how firmly she had insisted, for weeks now, that none of this was real enough to worry about. You should rest, she said finally, surprising herself with the softness in her own voice. I intend to, Cade said, watching her carefully. Are you concerned for me, Mara? I'm concerned that if the Alpha collapses from exhaustion, I'll be stuck here even longer while everyone sorts out a new one, Mara said quickly, deflecting again, though the excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. Cade smiled, clearly not fooled in the slightest, but he let the comment pass without further comment, too tired to push the point tonight. Later, alone in her small room, Mara sat by the window staring out at the moonlit village, turning Sable's words over in her mind despite every attempt to dismiss them. The headache, the restlessness, the way her whole body had physically relaxed the moment Cade walked through the door, as though some invisible tether connecting them had finally gone slack again. It's just stress, she told the empty room, unconvinced even by her own words. It's just an unusual situation, causing an unusual physical reaction, that's all. There is a scientific explanation for everything. The room, unsurprisingly, did not answer her. She thought about the child in the field, who told her she didn't smell like someone who was wrong. She thought about the way Cade's laugh had sounded, warm and real, entirely unlike anything a con artist would bother producing for a stranger he had no reason to trick. She thought about weeks of gentle patience from a man who held immense power over an entire hidden world, and yet had never once used that power to force her hand. This doesn't mean anything, she whispered to herself, though the words felt increasingly hollow each time she repeated them. Outside her window, unseen in the darkness, Corvin stood watching the light in her room, for longer than was strictly necessary, his expression unreadable, calculating something Mara could not begin to guess at. He had noticed the same things Sable had noticed, the headache, the restlessness, the way the human woman's guard had begun, however slowly, to crack, and he intended to use every piece of that information exactly when it would hurt the most. The horn sounded just after midnight, a deep, urgent note that ripped Mara straight out of sleep and onto her feet, before she had even fully processed what the sound meant. She stumbled to her window and saw the entire village already in motion, figures running between buildings, torches being lit, voices shouting orders, in tones that left no room for confusion. This was not a drill. Something was genuinely wrong. Her door burst open a moment later, and Pike stood there, breathless, his usual nervous energy replaced by something far sharper. You need to come with me, he said. Now. What's happening? Mara demanded, already grabbing a jacket. The rogue pack from the eastern border, Pike said. They didn't back down after the last dispute. They're attacking the northern edge of the village. The Alpha's already there. Mara's stomach dropped, the fear immediate and physical. Is he all right? I don't know, Pike admitted. Sable told me to get you somewhere safe. I'm not hiding while everyone else fights, Mara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. You don't have a choice, Pike said, already pulling her by the arm toward the central hall where several other non-fighters had gathered, mostly children and elderly pack members, all of them tense and quiet in a way that made the danger feel horribly real. Mara sat in the hall for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes, listening to distant shouts and the occasional bone-chilling snarl carried on the wind. She thought of Cade out there somewhere, fighting, and found her hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Then the sounds grew closer. A group of injured fighters were carried into the hall, and Mara, without thinking, without waiting for permission, moved forward to help, falling back on instincts built from years working at the veterinary clinic. She tore strips of cloth for bandages, pressed pressure against wounds, called out clear instructions to anyone nearby with steady hands, and for a while, fear gave way entirely to focus. You know what you're doing, an older woman said, startled, as Mara efficiently bound a deep gash on a young fighter's arm. I work with animals, Mara said. Turns out the basics aren't that different. The chaos continued outside, and then, abruptly, the sounds of fighting grew closer than they should have, and the door to the hall burst open as several rogue wolves broke through the outer defense line, snarling and half-shifted, eyes wild with desperation rather than strategy. Screams broke out. Mara grabbed the nearest child, pulling them behind an overturned table, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. One of the rogue wolves turned toward her, and for one terrifying second, Mara understood with complete clarity that she was about to die in a way she never could have explained to anyone back home. Then Cade was there. He moved faster than anything Mara had ever seen, faster than seemed physically possible, placing himself directly between her and the rogue wolf, with a snarl that shook the walls of the hall. His transformation was not the partial shift Callum had shown her weeks ago. This was complete, terrifying, and utterly overwhelming. An enormous wolf form, with fur dark as midnight, and eyes burning gold with a fury Mara had never seen on him before. The fight that followed was brutal and fast, and Mara, still crouched behind the table with the child clutched against her, watched in stunned silence as Cade fought off two rogue wolves at once, protecting the hall and everyone in it, with a ferocity that left no room for doubt about what he truly was. When it was over, when the last rogue wolf had fled and the horn sounded the signal for retreat and safety, Cade shifted back, breathing hard, blood on his shoulder from a wound Mara could see even from across the room. He turned immediately, scanning the hall until his eyes found her, and the raw relief that crossed his face when he saw she was unharmed hit Mara harder than the entire battle had. "Mara," he said, crossing the room in seconds, kneeling in front of her, his hands hovering as though afraid to touch her and confirm she was truly safe. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Mara said, her voice shaking despite her words. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," Cade said, though his shoulder clearly said otherwise. "That is not nothing," Mara said, and before she could stop herself, she reached out and pressed her hand against the wound, applying pressure exactly as she had for every other injured fighter that night, except this time, her hands trembled for an entirely different reason. Cade watched her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "You could have been killed," he said quietly. "So could you," Mara said, which apparently would have been a bigger problem for everyone else, given that you're supposedly irreplaceable. "I was terrified," Cade admitted, his voice rough. "Not for the pack, for you." Mara opened her mouth to deflect, to make a joke, to say something sharp and dismissive, the way she always did when things felt too big to hold steady. But nothing came out. She simply stared at him, at the blood on his shoulder, at the fear still lingering behind his eyes, and felt every carefully built wall inside her crack just a little further. "I still don't know what to call any of this," she whispered finally. "You don't have to call it anything tonight," Cade said. "Just let me make sure you're safe." Mara nodded, unable to argue, and allowed herself, for the first time since arriving in this strange hidden world, to lean into him without pulling away. Outside, the village slowly settled from chaos into exhausted relief, fires being tended, wounds bandaged, families reunited. And somewhere in the shadows, watching the moment between Mara and Cade with sharp, calculating eyes, Corvin filed away one more piece of information he intended to use very soon. The human woman's resistance was cracking, and cracks, in Corvin's experience, were exactly where the right amount of pressure could bring an entire structure down. In the days following the attack, something had shifted between them, and Mara no longer had the energy to pretend otherwise. She still refused to use the word fate. She still rolled her eyes whenever anyone mentioned the mate bond directly, but she found herself sitting with Cade every evening without needing an excuse, found herself worrying about his shoulder wound with a genuine concern she no longer bothered hiding, found herself asking real questions instead of dismissing every answer before it was even finished. "Tell me about before," she said one evening, as they sat together near the fire, his shoulder healing faster than any human wound could have, though he still moved carefully to favor it. "Before all this, before you were Alpha." Cade considered the question for a long moment, clearly unused to being asked about himself, rather than about the pack. "I became Alpha very young," he said finally. "My father died defending the northern border, much like the attack you witnessed, and the pack needed a leader immediately. There was no time for grief, only duty." "That sounds lonely," Mara said quietly. It was, Cade admitted. It still is most days. Leadership requires a kind of distance most people don't understand. You cannot show weakness, cannot show doubt, cannot lean on anyone, the way an ordinary person might lean on a friend or a partner. The pack needs certainty from their alpha, even when the alpha has none to give. Mara studied him, seeing for the first time the true weight he carried, not the mythic burden of destiny and fate, but the very ordinary, very human exhaustion of someone who had spent centuries holding everyone else together, while never being allowed to fall apart himself. Is that why the whole mate thing matters so much to your people? She asked. Because it gives you someone who doesn't have to see you as untouchable. Partly, Cade said. Mostly, it simply means I am no longer required to carry everything entirely alone. A mate is meant to be an equal, not a subject, not someone who serves the alpha, but someone who stands beside him. I haven't exactly been standing beside you, Mara said. I've mostly been arguing that you're running a very convincing cult. Cade laughed, the sound warmer now than it had been the first time she'd heard it. You've also patched up half my fighters, argued with my cousin, refused to be intimidated by anyone in this village including myself, and stayed calm during an actual attack, better than most trained warriors twice your age. I would call that standing beside me, Mara, whether or not you're ready to use the word fate to describe it. Mara looked away, uncomfortable with how accurately he had just described weeks of behavior she had convinced herself meant nothing beyond simple survival instinct. I'm not saying I believe in destiny, she said carefully. I'm saying, hypothetically, that if two people happen to genuinely like each other's company, despite an absolutely absurd set of circumstances, that wouldn't necessarily prove anything mystical was involved. It could just be two people who get along. Hypothetically, Cade repeated, clearly fighting a smile. Hypothetically, Mara confirmed, crossing her arms, though there was no real bite behind the gesture anymore. Then hypothetically, Cade said, leaning slightly closer, would this hypothetical woman be willing to hypothetically stay a little longer, even after the paths eventually allow her to leave? Mara's breath caught, and for a long moment she said nothing at all, caught between every instinct that told her to deflect and something quieter, steadier, that did not want to. I haven't decided anything yet, she said finally, softly, but I'm not saying no. Cade seemed to accept that answer, satisfied for now with the smallest crack in her armor, understanding better than most that pushing further would only make her retreat. Over the following days, their evenings by the fire became something Mara looked forward to without admitting it, conversations stretching longer, silences growing more comfortable, the space between them shrinking bit by bit, until sitting close no longer felt like an accident. Sable noticed, Pike noticed. The entire pack, in fact, seemed to notice the shift, treating Mara with even greater warmth, as though her continued presence had become something they no longer questioned, but simply accepted as an inevitable, welcome truth. Only Corvin seemed unmoved by the change, watching from a careful distance, with narrowed eyes, and a mind sharpened by growing urgency. If the human woman's resistance broke entirely, if she fully accepted her place at Cade's side, Corvin's opportunity to argue for a different kind of leadership would vanish along with it. He decided, quietly and without informing anyone, that the time for patience had run out. That night, while Mara slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, untroubled by headaches or doubts, Corvin met privately with two pack members, known for their loyalty to him rather than to their alpha, laying out a plan that would soon force Mara into a corner from which there would be no easy escape and no simple denial left available to her. The accusation came without warning, delivered in the middle of the main hall where the entire pack could witness it. She was seen near the storage building, where the border maps are kept, Corvin announced, standing before Cade with a carefully constructed expression of reluctant concern. The same night, a message somehow reached outside the territory, informing the rogue pack of our eastern patrol schedule. I would not have believed it myself, except two witnesses confirmed seeing her there. The hall fell silent. Mara felt every eye turned toward her, disbelief and suspicion mixing uncomfortably on faces that had, until moments ago, treated her with growing warmth. That's not true, Mara said immediately, her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. I've never been near any storage building. I don't even know where it is. Convenient that you would say so, Corvin replied smoothly. though I understand denial would be your first response, regardless of guilt. Who are these witnesses? Cade asked, his voice dangerously calm, though Mara could see the tension coiling through his shoulders. Corvin gestured, and 2 pack members stepped forward, both of them avoiding Mara's eyes as they repeated a story that placed her near the storage building on the night of the attack, claiming to have seen her slip away just before the rogue pack breached the border. That's impossible, Mara said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking with fury rather than fear. I was in the central hall helping with the wounded that entire night. Ask anyone who was there. Ask the woman whose arm I bandaged. Ask Pike. He came to get me himself. Convenient timing on both accounts, Corvin said, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his expression at the mention of witnesses who could actually contradict his story. Cade's gaze swept the hall until it landed on the older woman Mara had helped that night, the one whose son's arm she had bandaged with steady, practiced hands. Was Mara with you that night? He asked directly. The woman stepped forward without hesitation. She was beside me the entire time, Alpha. She saved my son's arm from infection with her quick thinking. She never left the hall, not once, not even for a moment. Pike stepped forward as well, his usual nervous energy replaced by fierce determination. I brought her to the hall myself before the attack even began. She couldn't have been anywhere near the storage building. I was with her the entire walk there. Corvin's expression tightened, the careful mask slipping just slightly, as the fabricated story began to crumble beneath the weight of real witnesses, with real testimony. Perhaps your witnesses are mistaken, Cade said to Corvin, his voice now edged with something cold and dangerous. Or perhaps they were given a story to repeat, rather than a truth to share. The 2 accusers shifted uncomfortably, and one of them, younger and clearly less committed to the deception than Corvin had hoped, finally broke under the weight of the Alpha's stare. Corvin told us to say we saw her there, he admitted quietly, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. He said it was necessary for the pack's protection, that the human's presence was distracting you from real threats, and that the pack needed to see proof of that before real damage was done. Gasps rippled through the hall. Corvin's expression hardened into something bitter and cornered. I did what I believed was necessary, Corvin said, abandoning pretense entirely now that his plan had unraveled. This pack cannot survive an Alpha who spends his nights worrying over one human woman instead of guarding our borders. I have watched you become distracted, careless, weakened by feelings you should have set aside the moment they threatened your duty. My duty has never once been neglected, Cade said, his voice thunderous now, echoing through the hall. I fought off the rogue pack myself. I have handled every border dispute, every internal conflict, every responsibility this pack has required of me, all while you plotted against an innocent woman to serve your own ambitions. Ambitions, Corvin spat. I only ever wanted what was best for our people. You wanted power, Cade said flatly, and you were willing to destroy an innocent woman's reputation, and possibly her safety, to get it. Mara, who had remained silent through most of the confrontation, finally stepped forward, standing beside Cade, rather than behind him. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. I didn't ask to be pulled into your world, didn't ask for any of your politics, and I certainly didn't do anything to deserve being framed for a crime I never committed. But I refuse to stand here and let you turn me into your excuse for something you clearly wanted to do anyway. The hall was utterly silent, every pack member watching the human woman defend herself with a fierceness none of them had expected, though perhaps, given everything they had witnessed from her these past weeks, they should have. Cade turned to Corvin, his expression final and unforgiving. You will answer to the pack council for this, he said. Your actions have endangered an innocent life and undermined trust within our own walls. Whatever ambitions you carried, they end here. Corvin was led away by 2 guards, his expression twisted with bitter resignation rather than remorse, and the hall slowly began to murmur with the aftershock of everything that had just unfolded. Mara stood there, breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing through her system, and felt Cade's hand find hers, steady and warm, grounding her in the aftermath of chaos she never could have anticipated when she first got lost on a hiking trail weeks ago. Are you all right? Cade asked quietly, once the hall had begun to clear. I will be, Mara said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it. The pack council met the following day to decide Corvin's fate, and though Mara was not required to attend, Cade asked if she wished to be present. and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did. The proceedings were formal, measured, and far more civilized than Mara had expected, though the weight of the decision hung heavy over the entire hall. Corvin stood before the council, stripped of his usual confidence, his carefully composed arguments about protecting the pack sounding hollow now that his true motivations had been exposed for everyone to see. "I acted out of loyalty to this pack's future," Corvin said, his voice tight. "Whatever methods I chose, my intentions were never truly malicious." "Framing an innocent person to serve your own ambitions is malicious by definition," Cade said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will be stripped of your border authority and placed under close watch for a full season, after which the council will decide whether trust can ever be rebuilt." Corvin accepted the ruling with tight-jawed silence, and Mara felt an unexpected flicker of something almost like sympathy beneath her lingering anger. Understanding, in some small way, the desperation of someone who felt his entire world shifting beyond his control, and had chosen the worst possible way to fight against it. Once the council dispersed and the hall emptied, Mara found herself alone with Cade for the first time since the confrontation, the adrenaline of the previous day finally settling into something quieter, more reflective. "You didn't have to defend me the way you did," Cade said, watching her carefully. "You could have simply denied the accusation and let the truth speak for itself." "I wasn't about to let him get away with using me as some kind of political weapon," Mara said. "I've spent weeks insisting I don't belong in your world, but that doesn't mean I was going to stand there quietly while someone tried to destroy my reputation, to prove a point about your leadership." "You fought for yourself," Cade said, something warm and proud coloring his voice. "And in doing so, you fought for us." Mara looked at him, at the quiet hope in his expression, and felt the last of her carefully built walls finally give way entirely. "I think," she said slowly, testing each word before she let herself say it fully, "that somewhere between the headaches and the training yard, and watching you nearly get yourself killed protecting a hall full of people, I stopped being able to convince myself that none of this was real." Cade went very still, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What are you saying, Mara?" "I'm saying," Mara said, taking a breath, "that I think you were right. About the pull. About whatever this bond actually is. I don't fully understand it, and honestly, I'm still terrified of everything it means for my old life, my job, my apartment, my entire ordinary existence. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel something real when I'm near you. I can't keep calling it Stockholm Syndrome when it's clearly something else." "Say the word," Cade said quietly, stepping closer, his voice rough with restrained emotion. "I won't push you, but I need to hear you say it, just once, so I know I'm not imagining this." Mara's heart pounded, and for a long moment she simply looked at him, weighing every ounce of stubborn resistance she had carried since that first stormy night, against the quiet certainty that had slowly, steadily built inside her ever since. "Mate," she said finally, the word feeling strange and enormous in her mouth, but not, to her genuine surprise, ridiculous at all. "You're my mate." "Fine. There. I said it." Cade's entire expression transformed, relief and joy breaking across his face, in a way that made Mara's breath catch. "I have been afraid," he admitted quietly, "every single day since that first night, that you would never accept this, that you would see it only as a trap, something forced upon you, rather than something you might genuinely choose." "I don't like being forced into anything," Mara said. "You know that better than anyone by now." "I do," Cade said, "which is exactly why hearing you choose this, rather than simply accept it, means more to me than you could possibly know." Mara felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes, an emotional response she had not anticipated, given how firmly she had insisted, for weeks, that she was far too rational for anything this dramatic. "I'm still going to make fun of the whole destiny thing," she warned. "Probably forever." "I would expect nothing less," Cade said, smiling, and reached out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering against her cheek, with a tenderness that made her lean into the touch despite herself. "This doesn't mean I'm suddenly comfortable with everything," Mara added. "There's still a lot I don't understand about your world, about what my life is supposed to look like from here. We'll figure it out together," Cade said. "There's no need to understand everything today." For the first time since arriving in this hidden world, Mara felt something settle inside her chest that had nothing to do with fear or confusion, something steady and warm, that she suspected, despite every rational argument she had built against it, might genuinely be happiness. Outside the hall, word had already begun to spread through the village that the Alpha's mate had finally accepted the bond, and warmth spread with it, pack members smiling at one another with quiet relief, as though a long-held breath had finally been released. Only Corvin, watched closely under his new restrictions, received the news with a bitterness he kept carefully hidden, already resigned to a future he could no longer shape according to his own ambitions. 3 weeks later, Mara stood at the edge of the village, where the forest met the open road, staring at the exact spot where the paths had once looped endlessly back on themselves, no matter which direction she tried. "It really does let you through now," she said, half amazed, watching sunlight fall naturally onto an actual visible road in the distance, one that led back toward the ordinary world she had once been so desperate to return to. "The land recognizes when an outsider has chosen to stay of their own free will," Cade said, standing beside her. "It no longer needs to hold you here." "So I could leave right now if I wanted," Mara said, testing the thought carefully, the way she tested most things, before fully trusting them. "You could," Cade said, and though his voice remained steady, she could see the effort behind that steadiness, the quiet fear that even now, after everything, she might choose the road over him. Mara looked at the path a long moment, thinking of her apartment, her job at the clinic, the life she had built before a storm, and a wrong turn changed absolutely everything. She thought of her cat, who she had arranged, through careful negotiation and a very confused neighbor, to be looked after these past weeks. She thought of everything ordinary and familiar waiting for her on the other side of that road. Then she thought of training yards and firelit evenings, of Sable's blunt honesty and Pike's nervous jokes, of a little girl who told her she didn't smell like someone who was wrong, and of a man who had never once, despite holding every kind of power over her situation, forced her hand. "I'm not choosing this because some ancient bond told me to," Mara said finally, turning to face him fully. "I want that understood clearly, right now, forever. I'm choosing this because somewhere along the way, despite my best efforts to remain completely unreasonable about it, I actually fell for you. The destiny thing is just a very convenient bonus." Cade's expression broke into something so openly relieved and joyful that Mara felt her own chest ache with the force of it. "That is the only explanation I will ever need," he said. "Good," Mara said. "Because I refuse to be the Luna who talks about fate with a straight face at pack gatherings. I have a reputation to maintain." "Duly noted," Cade said, laughing, pulling her against him in a way that felt entirely natural now. No hesitation left in either of them. They walked back toward the village together, and word of her decision spread quickly, the entire pack gathering that evening for what Sable called, with typical bluntness, the world's most overdue celebration. Mara found herself surrounded by warmth she never could have anticipated weeks earlier, when she had stumbled into this clearing soaked and furious, convinced she had wandered into some elaborate hoax. Pike presented her with a small carved wooden token, the kind given to new pack members, stammering through an explanation of its meaning, until Mara laughingly told him to just say the nice thing he meant to say. Sable, in her own way, simply nodded once at Mara with clear approval, which Mara had learned was practically a standing ovation coming from someone so reserved. Even Corvin, still under close watch and stripped of much of his former authority, was present at the gathering, standing at a careful distance, his expression unreadable, but notably lacking its previous hostility. Whether that meant genuine acceptance or simple resignation, Mara wasn't certain, but she decided, for tonight at least, it did not matter. Later, as the celebration wound down and the fires burned low, Mara sat with Cade near the edge of the gathering, watching the pack she now called her own settle into quiet, contented conversation around them. "I still have a lot of questions," she admitted, "about what my life looks like now, about my old job, my apartment, my entire human life that doesn't just disappear because I've decided to stay here. We'll build something that honors both," Cade said. "You don't have to abandon who you were to become who you're choosing to be now." "Good," Mara said, "because I plan on keeping every ounce of my personality intact, including the sarcasm, especially the sarcasm." "I would never dream of asking you to change that," Cade said. "It's part of what made me fall for you in the first place. watching you argue with an entire hidden world and refuse to back down. Mara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder, watching the last embers of the fire glow softly against the night. For the record, she said quietly, I still think the whole destiny thing sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. Noted, Cade said, echoing the same word he had used that very first stormy night, when everything between them had still been an argument, rather than an understanding. But, Mara continued, I suppose ridiculous things can still turn out to be true. Cade turned to look at her, gold eyes warm in the firelight, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. That, he said softly, is the truest thing you've said since the night I found you. Around them, the pack settled into quiet contentment, the village finally at peace after weeks of tension and uncertainty, and Mara Ellison, once the most stubbornly unconvinced human to ever stumble into a hidden world of wolves and kings, found herself exactly where fate, whether she liked admitting it or not, had always intended her to be.